So, folks, a lot of us have known for a while that cops, they're kind of scary, right? Like they're kind of empowered by the state. They have a little bit of a monopoly on violence situation going on. And they can kill you if they want, and if they do it in the right way, they get plausible deniability. Um and One thing though is, and we also know that cops can form gangs within police departments. The LA the LA Police Department has like several gangs operating within the police. And that seems all really bad, right? But one of the things I really didn't see coming, and in retrospect, I'm kicking myself, is a story that came out the other day that indicates there's another unaddressed and unreally looked at problem among police officers, and that is they're also arms dealers. Now, this is like one of the biggest does in retrospect, I suppose. Like they buy copious amounts of like military grade hardware. Like that's part of what the militarization of the police is. These different departments can then go and buy and essentially get at massive discounts military equipment, right? And ostensibly so that they can use them in their departments. But this story that came out here is from CBS doing an investigation. So good work to CBS here. Is kind of jaw-dropping. There's no sound.
And illegally selling guns. A review of government audits and court records over the last 20 years uncovered instances in 23 states across the U.S., plus Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C., for a total of more than 50 cases. And people who were supposed to protect and serve were selling these high-powered guns and making a steep profit. Erin Couchie, who led this reporting, is here with me in Studio 57. She's a producer for CBS News Crime and Public Safety Unit. Erin, this is so mind-boggling.
You know what? I respect the suit and the Adidas. Okay, I respect that she did not she either didn't take into account that her shoes would be showing, or she did, in which case I respect that decision.
Boggling that these high-ranking officers are getting these guns and then they're selling them to criminals. In essence, the law enforcement officers are criminals themselves.
Yeah, keep in mind, when you're dealing arms, you are having other people break the law. Like this is deeply weird.
Right. So the key is that these weapons are usually deemed too dangerous to be on the street. So they're using their access as law enforcement officials to gain access to things that otherwise wouldn't be on the market. They're saying we need this for our official duties to serve and protect, but actually they're secretly turning around and they're selling.
They're buying them because they're law enforcement officials, or they're requesting them? Tell me more.
It runs the gamut. So there are 50 cases all across the country.
Too dangerous for the streets, like machine guns. I'm gonna spoil this story a little bit. One of the things that cops were trying to get their hands on were M134 Gatling style miniguns. Not like we're if you're unfamiliar with Gatling guns in the modern era, that gun can shoot 6,000 bullets a minute. So, yeah, not your typical loadout, to say the least.
And there were different ways they got it. Sometimes they stole it out of the inventory. Sometimes they were their issued weapons by the department. In the most egregious.
Wait, why? So that they could sell them to criminals. Why would you need a rotary cannon? For illegal activities, I presume. And by illegal activities, I mean, of course, arming militia groups. Like, you know that this is partly where militias get their military gear. Like, it makes so much sense that these rural police departments would be funneling guns to militias. The trailer for Lord of War 2 looks fucking wild. Thank you for the $2 super chat.
Cases, there were battlefield weapons, and that requires them to go to federal regulators, ask for special permission to gain access to them. And just to give you a sense of what kind of weapons these could take out an armored tank. They could go through a building at the other side, hit a target 18 football fields away. They can take out a military helicopter. That's an example from a real case. We found an Iowa police chief in a 3-person police department. Town was the population of less than 800. And he had requested over the course of 4 years 90 machine guns to get access to. He'd gotten approval. It took until he requested a Gatling-style machine gun that spewed 6,000 rounds a minute for federal regulators to say there's something fishy going on and starting to look into it.
I'm really sorry. How does a police department of 3 officers ordering 90 machine guns not set off some kind of alarm in your system? How?
A cool fiver to Forward Fidelity.
Firefishy, thank you for the $5 fiver. Like, how does buying a gun that can down a helicopter make sense for some of these? Like, again, if you're buying 90 machine guns, it's not for your 3 guys. And the people who are interested in illegally buying those machine guns are criminal gangs or militias. And you might ask, what's the distinction? There's none.
He's now serving a 5-year prison sentence, but he's totally unremorseful about it.
Like, how do you, I'm sorry, like, how do you defraud the government? Like, I'm sorry, how much does a machine gun cost? Okay, like about $700 times 90. And you know what? They're probably selling it at an upcharge. Oh, and GamerG, this isn't just this case. This is just one out of dozens of other ones. And like, he's gonna serve 5 years in prison. He probably made an ungodly amount of money off of these deals.
He just says it's a business. It's not illegal to sell things in this country. And he's appealing his sentence because he just doesn't think it's a crime.
He stole weapons from the government, sold them for his own personal profit, using your goddamn tax dollars. And he doesn't see anything wrong with that, and he's going to be back out in 5 years. And you know what? There's a non-zero chance he's going to get hired by another rural police department.
Oh, this is a lot to take in, Aaron. And when I'm looking through all of this
an M249 belt-fed machine gun can cost up to 10 grand. Damn. Okay, he probably made bank.
material, I'm seeing here that your team also uncovered social media posts where the buyers are talking about how they got the officers to sell weapons. Tell me more about that.
So when you're talking about machine guns, you do have to go to the federal regulation because there's been an outright ban in the United States since 1986. No one can have access to them. The one exception is official government use. So they go to federal regulators, but all you need is a letter.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. He was not selling them for $700 a pop.
It's functionally a permission slip. A police chief signs a letter saying, I need this for department use. So there's literally do-it-yourself videos on social media explaining there's online web forums, and it just comes down to relationships. There's some guys who said, I know a police chief, I know a sheriff, I know a SWAT guy. They just take turns signing these letters for me, and they make it like it's all for fun. Some of these guys just think it's fun to like literally mount it on an armored tank and just shoot it off into a field. And a lot of the guys is totally innocent, and that's what they do. But the problem is there are cases where they've ended up in the hands of criminals. So
Yeah, I'm sorry. I fully admit that it might be fun to shoot a gun like that. But at the same time, there's a lot of money being thrown around here, and that amount of money doesn't get spent on just horsing around, really. Even if you're rich and bored in rural areas, you're buying that gun for a less than noble purpose.
They've ended up with drug traffickers, they've ended up with arms dealers. There was a case where a police chief, a mayor, and a town, it was a member of the town council, were trafficking guns and tactical gear to a Mexican cartel. There was a
Government officials selling guns to Mexican cartels for their own profit. How these people like we see stories of like people spending like 30 years in prison for weed. This to me this is the kind of crime where you should go to prison for a long time.
case just last year where they all ended up pleading guilty. It was 2 police chiefs, a sheriff, a Delta Force veteran, all conspiring together with a sanctioned Russian arms dealer, and they ended up in the hands of an international gun trafficker. Again, all of that ended up pleading guilty, so we know for sure that they were doing that. And then there was a case in the Northeast where it ended up being used in a fatal gang shooting of a 14-year-old boy who was just standing at a high school football game and accidentally got shot. So most of the cases don't end up in those egregious situations, but they certainly have and do, and these are law enforcement officials.
And arguably, that's the whole reason why they're supposed to have these permission slips, because once they get out into the public, then they're uncontrolled, and then you don't know where they're going to go next. But I'm also seeing here that there's some former ATF agents that you spoke with that said that they were reluctant actually to charge these officers who sold.
Jail. You know, there's a very simple solution to this. Jail. What, you were reluctant to do your job and end an arms smuggling operation? Jail. Thank you for telling us that. Fired.
The weapons. What's going on with that?
So we spoke to about half a dozen agents who were the lead investigators on some of these cases, and the officers themselves were the ones that, or sorry, rather the federal agents were the ones who were actually really frustrated with this. They wanted to bring these cases, but they each had an anecdote about how they'd had to go to the department they had caught doing this, who had been doing it repeatedly, almost like as a course of business, that they were getting these guns just for the express purpose of selling them, even though they were supposed to be their department weapons. And they just had to say, I'm letting you off with a warning. Prosecutors were generally reluctant to try these cases, according to them.
So it's
Fired. Like, I'm sorry. Fired. It is so infuriating to me that, like, the Hunter Biden, right, fills out a form wrong, right? Lies on a form about his drug use, has a gun, gets prosecuted endlessly by Republicans. They make it a national news story. Departments across the United States are dealing guns onto the streets with your kids. And prosecutors don't want to bring charges against them because they have to work with those police departments. Not a peep from any conservative politician. God.
the prosecutors, not the ATF.
It's a little bit of both. So they say the prosecutors don't really want to do it because the sentences are very light. Most of these cases, people make plea deals. They serve less than a year, just a few months.
How do you steal tens of thousands of dollars of government property bought with taxpayer money and sell them for your own profit and you get less than a year? We have cops out on the street every day shooting kids over candy bars that they're shoplifting. But the cops who are actually putting guns onto the street are getting less than a year?
In jail. But we got an ATF memo from a few years ago that described this as a growing trend. That was in 2017.
Look at this. How do you get like a year in prison for buying one of these and selling it to a militia? How? Jail. Fired. I mean, these people should be barred from any kind of like police officering forever. I shot that in the military? Yeah. Because they're buying because of the militarization of police in America, police departments can buy military gear from the government with their taxpayer budget. And so they were essentially buying these from the government and then selling them at a massive markup to people in their communities. That like this should be massive action to curtail this. Massive crackdown on police engaging in this behavior. But not a peep. Not a goddamn peep. Instead, it's wall-to-wall coverage of like a guy who did an assassination, I guess. Whatever. This is a much bigger problem. Where are people getting all the guns to do crimes? Check the police department. And not a single politician on either side of the aisle is going to bring this up in the mainstream media, and it makes me sick.
And most of the cases we found actually have happened since then. So it seems to be, it's hard to tell if it's happening more often or they're actually just going after it a little bit more now. But the memo said it's our job to educate, not investigate. And I actually tracked down the senior agent who had written that memo, and he said, we generally take the posture, we don't question our law enforcement partners. These are our partners, we're just going to give them the benefit of the doubt, and it's really only in the very, very egregious cases that we actually pursue. So when they've gotten many, many warnings, when we've traced them directly to a crime, and that's when you start to see charges. So the more than 50 cases, that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more out there that
No, you don't have to educate them. You don't have to, they know. They know what they're doing is illegal. They just don't care because even if they get caught, it doesn't matter. Ah!
All these agents are saying, oh yeah, I said, how do I look that up in the court docket? You're not going to see anything.
Lady Ringclad, you should always be
Erin
here.
Couchy, thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
You can find Erin's full investigation into law enforcement illegally selling weapons on our website.
Yeah. It's, I mean, this is so damning. Adair, Iowa had a population of 794, so it seemed suspicious when its 3-person police department asked regulators to buy 90 machine guns, including an M134 Gatling-style minigun capable of shooting up to 6,000 rounds of ammunition every minute. Federal agents later discovered Adair's police chief, Bradley Wendt, was using his position to acquire weapons and to sell them for personal profit. A jury convicted Wendt earlier this year of conspiracy to defraud the United States, lying to federal law enforcement, and illegal possession of a machine gun. Wendt was unapologetic and has appealed his conviction. Quote, if I'm guilty of this, every cop in the nation is going to jail. That's him. That's the guy who got convicted. He's saying this problem is so widespread, every cop in America would go to jail. Your terms are acceptable. And like, it's not just like a police officer, right? It's usually law enforcement leaders like sheriffs, captains, lieutenants, chiefs of police that are the ones engaging this. This isn't even like your grunt, beat cop. This is like the cops in charge of every department. Remember how like the big thing in like 2016 was like, oh, we need better training for the police, better training for cops. You can't train these people. The problem is from top down in the department. You had 2 of those Gatling guns on a warship to defend it against small boats trying to board you. Yeah, like these are the kinds of things you need if you want to get involved in like a full-on assault on like the US Capitol. One for each side of the ship. Yeah, you only need 2. God. I mean, it's really insane here, right? They found at least 50 cases of police illegally selling their weapons online through dealers out of the homes or the backs of their cars. In many cases, the weapons were sold to gun enthusiasts, often at steep markups as high as 10 times what they were bought for. They make so much money doing this, guys. In several cases, the gun... And keep in mind, they're buying the guns like with taxpayer money, guys. They're not... Police departments don't personally buy each of their guns. In several cases, the guns wound up in the hands of violent felons and were used to commit acts of crime, including drug trafficking, international arms dealing, and in one case, the fatal shooting of a 14-year-old boy attending a high school football game. And honestly, I would wager the number is a lot higher than 1. If you have this prolific problem of police selling guns and essentially becoming their local arms dealers, it's a lot more than 1. Yeah. Nearly 26,000 guns were traced from American crime scenes back to a government agency, law enforcement, or the military between 2017 and 2021. 26,000 guns are leaking out because of this shit. That's only in a 4-year period. It's thousands of guns every year, guys. This is the shocking thing to me, right here. The government auditors investigated firearms that law enforcement agencies reported missing over a 15-year period. The General Services Administration Inspector General found that more than 2/3 of all missing firearms from law enforcement agencies had not gone missing at all, but rather were inappropriately sold or traded, including Uzis and grenade launchers that were never recovered. Over $100 million worth of guns and ammunition bought by ICE is unaccounted for, and that was in 2018 alone. $100 million worth of ammunition all fell out of the back of a truck and wound up in some militia group's hands, I'm sure. ICE, unsurprisingly, did not respond to requests for comment. Oh, God. Those cases are just the tip of the iceberg, according to interviews with half a dozen former Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms agents who worked directly on these investigations. Several career agents shared anecdotes about letting police departments off with warnings after repeatedly finding their service weapons in the hands of private citizens. Not, by the way, not after they found that the guns were missing, after the guns had already been sold or traded to private citizens. And I just have to say, how do you think they find the guns in the hands of private citizens? It's when they're used. It's when those weapons are used in a crime. But it's the immigrants causing the crime and violence. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The call's coming from inside the house. Hardin wrote the memo after... Oh, yeah. Yeah. Hardin told CBS News that if officers persisted after being warned or if their weapons were traced to a crime, they should be held accountable, meaning that they're not currently. If we don't do this, he said, then it'll be turning a blind eye and saying officers are above the law. And guess what? They didn't do the thing. Officers are above the law. That's why there's nothing scarier than a cop. Nothing. Hardin wrote the memo after his intelligence unit traced an outlawed pistol seized in a narcotics bust to a recent purchase by a beat cop in Pasadena, California. Now retired, Hardin still remembers the officer crying on his shoulder when federal agents showed up to arrest him for illegally selling more than 100 weapons out of his home. The officer argued at the time that he didn't know he was breaking the law, but he later pled guilty. He served less than a year in federal prison and paid a $10,000 fine, but was allowed to keep his Porsche and Alfa Romeo. He paid a $10,000 fine for making... He's a beat cop. Beat cops can't afford Porsches. Meaning that, and I'm sorry, but 100 arms sales is not going to net you enough money to buy a Porsche. I mean, maybe, I guess it doesn't say how big the guns were. Maybe they were all just colossal. But I'm guessing there were only 100 that they could trace to him directly. There were probably more. And his fine was only $10,000 and a few months in jail, and he clearly had made so much more money than $10K. Again, if the punishment for a crime is a fine, then it's only a punishment that it's only a crime that applies to the lower class. And if you are making millions off of selling illegal arms and getting them for free to you personally because you're buying them with taxpayer money and then selling them for profit, you are able to get off scot-free, effectively. It's infuriating. It's infuriating. Yeah. I don't know what to say other than I don't think you can really fix this. Like, this is kind of one of those blue screen errors on a systemic level. I don't know how you fix this. Usually I have some kind of prescriptive action or like hypothetical policy we could apply to prevent this, but it needs to be something where like prosecute that. And you know, actually here you go. I'm going to recycle one that I had in 2016. There needs to be a separate department that prosecutes police officers. You know, local prosecutors should not be the ones bringing cases against local police. Okay? It should be an independent federal body. Okay? I think that needs to happen because in so many of these cases, any kind of oversight is hampered and like hamstrung by the fact that local prosecutors who work with local police are the ones who then need to charge those police if they break the law. So there needs to be like a federal bureau for anti-police. And like, I in some of these cases, I would not be opposed to just firing the entire police department and starting from scratch. Oh, by the way, in case you're wondering, like, has it always been this bad? No. No, it hasn't. What made it get this bad, you might ask? Would it surprise you if I told you it was Donald Trump? Because this is kind of an important coda to the entire thing. During his first administration, Trump revoked an Obama-era executive order restricting the transfer of military equipment from the Defense Department to law enforcement nationwide. Donald Trump is directly responsible for a large degree of illegal arms dealing within the United States. And I think you all need to know that. Like, at the moment, there's really no mechanism outside of getting involved in your local politics to try and hold these cops accountable. That's pretty much all we got, you know? Well, yeah, One-Eyed Heathen, yeah, it's not just Trump, but the guy who made it possible for the Defense Department to give military hardware to police without any kind of hoops to jump through was Donald Trump. Did Biden not reinstate that policy? My understanding is that he did not. So I guess it's also on Biden, too. I'm sorry. Biden is a real coward. Let's see. Yeah, I can't. I mean, maybe he did, but I can't find it right now. Frankly, I didn't need to see this as my first segment today. I'm sorry, it was really important. We needed to talk about it. Sorry, guys. The news is bad. What can I say?